Hello, everyone. I am Sam Eckmann of Gold Derby, and I am here with Robert Horn, the book writer for the brand new musical Shucked, currently playing on Broadway. And Robert, I have to ask because before all of your Broadway stints, you were writing for television, series like Designing Women and High Society. And I was just wondering, how easy do you think your, skills and experience for TV translated into your theater writing?
A good question. But actually, it was sort of reversed because I started off here studying theater, wanting to be a playwright, and it's
Mhm.
just nobody else seemed to want that. So I ended up going to LA just because I knew people there and I had to get out. I just like needed to get out of New York for a while, and got this career in television that I never expected, but used at that time there were a lot of situational comedies on television. So
Mhm.
what you were sort of doing when you did a sitcom was you were like doing a play every week with a live audience. And so it was actually my theater skills that helped me create a career in television. And so when I finally came back and got to do theater again, I felt like I was coming home to something that I had originally started with, except the difference is having done television for so long and writing the kind of comedies that I write, I rewrite a lot because, and I think a lot of New York actors and theater, you get people I think often can be somewhat a little more precious about their material because it takes so long to write them. But I sort of then grew up really, it isn't working, you rewrite it and you rewrite it and you rewrite it. And so I think I was able to merge those worlds. But also to answer your question, it's a very different art form. Anything cinematic is very, very different than anything with it that's on a stage and is live, and you're playing to an intimate house with an instant reaction, and you're playing to the mezzanine, and it's all that. So it's a very different skill set, but it's sort of all takes from the sort of the same river of humor.
Yeah. Well, you touched on rewriting there, and I believe you've been working on this for maybe about 10 years, which is a very long time with a project, and I'm sure things have to change along the way. So how much gets retooled or thrown out when a new actor joins, when it gets up on its feet?
Well, when a new actor joins, we've been very lucky that a lot of the actors, the performers that are in Shucked now have been in it for a while, which is sort of, I think, a tribute to our director, Jack O'Brien, and our composers, because the actors want to do the show. So they've literally passed on other things in the hopes that we were going to get to Broadway and do what we did. But for example, we did our out of town in Salt Lake City and lost an actor who I loved and who decided to do a different show and cast somebody else to come in who is wonderful, but I rewrote it for his talents and his point and so yeah, you do rewrite. I give birth to a script, but an actor brings it to life, and that's a collaboration. And so I love rewriting for an actor, but you also are writing a track, and so many actors hopefully will perform that. So you sort of find that balance, but different people are different, have different deliveries with comedy, and you want to write to actors' strengths.
Yeah. And I think anyone who watches this show will know you are great at creating these one-liners. The jokes just come so fast and furious. But I would say your comedy beyond that has a lot of it has a lot of heart to it and a lot of joy to it, I would say.
Thank you.
Can
Thank you.
you can you kind of pinpoint where that specific brand of comedy of yours came from?
Well, I grew up. I was always a comedy guy. I loved comedy. I used comedy as a defense mechanism growing up. I had an odd childhood, and I was out and gay, and at a time when you often weren't, and there was a lot of you were ostracized. I grew up in the foster system in New York as a ward of the state, and so you're put in situations where in order to survive, I used comedy, and I think a lot of that comedy came as a defense mechanism for me. But I was lucky that my mind was able to work quickly, come up with something funny really quickly. And I grew up, I've talked about this before. My mom was Ed Sullivan, who used to had a very famous television show on for many, many years, and it was all just acts. And she was his assistant, his secretary at the time. And so I grew up watching shows like that. And I grew up, reading Neil Simon and great stand-up comedians like Phyllis Diller and Toady Fields and reading like Murray Schiskal, and Mel Brooks and that kind of vaudeville-esque comedy. And I love that. So for Shucked, what I wanted to do was redefine what I think is an American classic kind of comedy for a new generation, for a millennial generation. But for me, the heart of it, like you say, comes sort of because you always start with the heart. The comedy then is the prism through which you see that. And I don't ever like to get maudlin. I like emotion, and I like, but I don't really like sentimentality. And so what you'll see in Shucked often is you'll get emotional, it'll get moving, and then I will cut it with a joke, because I never like it to go just past that line of becoming like sappy. And so, because I just don't love that. So that's sort of, I think, and the process is how to navigate that. And I also got very lucky in that I have these two composers that are incredible storytellers. So I could dig into the humor, and even though they're very funny and they have some very funny lyrics, a lot of the emotion of the piece comes through the music. And so it's just about how to then stop the comedy, let the audience breathe, and get into a song that will move you and then bring you back into comedy again.
Yeah. And those composers are Brandy Clark and Shane McAnally. Is it difficult to sort of get that? What's the process like of getting that team to a place where the songs and script feel cohesive?
Well, I think any good musical feels like one person wrote it. You should always feel like one person wrote that. And this is the truth. This is not like, oh, you're doing an interview, so say this. This is the goddess's honest truth. The minute I walked into the room and met Shane and Brandy, that was it. We were on the same page. Their humor is exactly like my humor. We all knew the show that we wanted to write. And it was never any different. So for them, it was really about learning how to do this art form, because writing a country song or a pop song is very different. You're not telling a whole story. In a musical, you're telling the story you need at that moment, whether it's an internal monologue, whether it's forwarding the action, whether it's an I Want song, whatever that is. So they sort of learned how to adapt to this art form. But man, they are so funny and their hearts are so big. It was so organic. It was the first time and I've worked with some incredible composers. It's never been as organic as this. And we did it together. We sat in a room most of the time and did it together.
That's great. And that is great to do it together. I feel like one of the other important ingredients, especially in comedy, is the audience. So are you still going back and taking in audience reaction? How much changes based off of that?
Well, you write the show in a bubble because you have no audience, and then actors come in and you write the show with the actors. But the missing ingredient is always the audience. They're always the missing character. Once an audience comes, I rewrite constantly. I give something 2 times, doesn't work, it's out. And at that point, by the time you're sort of done with rehearsal and you're in previews, the director is watching the actors. He's Jack O'Brien, our incredible director. He's giving notes. At that point, I'm watching the audience. And so the audience is telling me what's working and what's not. And so I will change it constantly until last week when Mr. O'Brien came to me and he said, "You're done. I love you and you're done. You've done your job. There's nothing." And they slapped the pen out of my hand. I rewrite it literally tonight.
I think one of the things I appreciate too is that the show, a lot of the corniness of it comes out of looking at these tropes of kind of rural farm folk. But then the script kind of upends those stereotypes because it's a diverse show. There's queer characters. It's an accepting community. Was that always the case? Was that always an important facet of the script?
Yeah, for this incarnation, it was absolutely important. And thank you for saying that. I never wanted to look down on or condescend any point of view or any lifestyle. I wanted the world had started, as you know, the world had started to change. It was becoming filled with division and vitriol. And It was just, I wanted to write about it, and I wanted to be able to look at both sides. I think we live in a world where you watch CNN or you watch Fox News, and there's no in between, and I don't believe that. I don't believe we can. I don't think our job is to change other people's point of view. We all have different ideologies, but I think our task as a country, as a culture, and in humanity is to open our hearts to people who are different than us. So it was really important to me never to condescend or make fun of hardworking, small town, mid-America, that heartland, hardworking heartland people, but also have fun with them. The same with the character that comes in from the big city, who is sort of this urban, somewhat intellectual. Oh my God, you have the cutest dog. This somewhat urban, and make fun of that as well, and bring those worlds together. The theme for me of the show was always going to be, if you don't open your hearts to people who are different than you, you do not grow. So for me, corn became an analogy for growth and what that is. And I needed, and I know I wanted to close this town off from the outside world and make them fearful, even though they had a little, as they say, we have a little bit of everything in this town. It's diverse, they're open, but they also are so afraid that somebody's going to come in and change their way of life, which I think that's what we're afraid of, that somebody with a different color skin or a different lifestyle or different somebody is going to come in and change our way of life. And I wanted the show to be about the understanding that we can open our hearts to people who are different than us. That doesn't mean we have to change what we believe.
Yeah.
Long sentence, but thank you for asking.
No.
Yes, that was always very important to me.
Yeah, and when you put it like that and describe it, it just sounds so universal and wonderful, and it's like, oh, I want to go see that show. But in the end, it is a show without any sort of IP. It's not based on a major motion picture or anything like that, which so much of Broadway is. There's so much pressure on musicals these days. Was it difficult to get it to this point and get people to say yes to this?
Yeah. Well, it's scary. And it's in a post-pandemic, limited tourist world right now, where shows are so expensive, and I think sales for theater is getting back to what it was, but it's not what it was pre-pandemic. I understand why producers want to have a recognizability, something recognizable that will get people into the theater, but also we're seeing that doesn't always work.
You never know.
Over again. And so it was really scary. And honestly, we didn't know that we would get there, but we met this producer who knew Shane McAnally's, his wife knew Shane McAnally's husband. That's sort of how that happened. Who was a fanatic, loved Shane and Brandy's work, knew them, loves country music. He produced Beautiful on Broadway, and as well as a few other things. And he fell in love with the project, and all he said was, I will get this to Broadway, trust me. And he did. He's 35 years old. He understands how to market an original musical for a new generation and a new Broadway. Broadway has changed. It says how to market a show, how to reach people, how to make it affordable for people. All of that has changed. And we have to embrace that change as a community, as an industry, because that's where the world is going, and he understands that and understood it, and he got us here. What happens after here, we'll find out, but he got it here, and it was purely on marketing and word of mouth that the show started to take off, and that's Mike Bosworth. He did that.
Yeah. Well, hopefully there's a lot more after here.
I hope so. I love this little show, and I sure hope so. And audiences seem to be having a great time.
Yeah. And I was thinking, looking at while you're working on Shucked, you also have kind of a totally opposite thing happening with Hercules, because Shucked is its own, new thing. Hercules was already existing in a finished form as a movie. Yeah. Is that an easier process to work on or a more difficult process than something new?
Both have their challenges and rewards. It's when you work, Hercules is, we're working with the incredible Disney theatrical. Mm-hmm. But there are a lot more voices. So, you're dealing with it's very corporate. There's a very clear brand. There's a very clear, the way it's an incredible experience. but I always feel like, doing Hercules is sort of like this big corporate, you're in an office building, it's this big corporate thing. And Shucked is like mom and pop are putting on a show. So it's a very different experience. Both are wonderful. You just have to approach them differently, and understand that it's a very different thing.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
obviously Hercules, because it's Disney, has a different very approach to marketing, and they have a lot of money, and they really get behind something, and you feel the energy of that. It's just a smaller musical is such a different thing.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I wanted, before I have to let you go, to take you back a few years because you won a Tony for Tootsie.
Before these, before
No. No, you look great. Because you won a Tony for your work on Tootsie,
Yeah.
the musical, and in your acceptance speech, you made reference to sort of all the, many times that we as artists hear no and rejection a lot. So since that point, are you hearing yes more? What has changed for you the most since winning that Tony?
Well, listen, you win a Tony Award and it does change it changes people's awareness of you. I mean,
Mhm.
up until that moment, really, I had done 13, I had done a bunch of stuff in theater, but there wasn't, it was like, oh, I hear he's good, he's fine, but they weren't knocking down my door. Not that they are now either, but there's just, and I apologize, my things keep going on. But there wasn't as an awareness of what I do as there is now, but also it's still competitive. It's a competitive marketplace, and I still hear no a lot. There are things I want, and they're like, one of the other sides of having success is you sort of get labeled as something. And I love writing these big, wonderful, funny comedies but there's another side of, there are other things I want to do, and it's hard. I have to sort of start all over and convince them, no. Give me a chance. I think I can do that too, So yes, but I wouldn't trade any of it for anything. I know how long the line is to get in this door, and I truly do. And every day I still can't believe I get to sit in that theater. I get to work with these people because they're there, but for the grace. There are a lot of people more talented than I am that never get that opportunity. I just got really lucky, and I think when the opportunity came, I was ready for it. And that's what success is. I think it's opportunity meets ability. But I'm never unaware of the fact that I just got really lucky.
Yeah. Well, it's really great to have a brand new musical comedy on Broadway. So thank you for filling Broadway with laughter. Thank you for joining me here. And
Thank you.
everyone who's watching, stay tuned, subscribe to Gold Derby, and stay with us throughout this season.
Gold Derby. I got to tell you, when I was nominated for Tootsie, I checked Gold Derby every day. Every day I was like, where am I? What are they betting? Yeah.
Well, we bet on you, so we're glad to have you. It was great to talk to you, Robert.
All right. It was nice talking to you.